Have you ever wondered why a quiet emptiness still lingers in your soul, despite having everything you've ever dreamed of? What if the pursuit of success, love, and security, everything we're told to chase, still leaves us asking, is this all there is? This Leo Tolstoy, one of history's greatest writers, a man who had it all yet stood on the edge of despair. At 50, with fame, wealth, and a loving family, Tolstoy faced an existential crisis so profound, it nearly broke him. Why begin if everything ends? Why live when the void awaits? This video isn't just a biography, it's a mirror to your questions. Through Tolstoy's journey, from the heights of literary genius to the depths of doubt, you'll discover how he wrestled with life's meaning and found answers in the unlikeliest places. Stay until the end to uncover how his revelations could shift your perspective on happiness, purpose, and even your daily struggles. You'll see why his story resonates across centuries, offering lessons for anyone feeling lost in today's chaotic world. Don't miss the surprising truths Tolstoy unearthed. They might just change how you live. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please click the subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated on all our latest content. That deep mistrust, the quiet shadow that crept in during his childhood, never really left Leo Tolstoy. It followed him like a ghost through the bright corridors of youth and the stormy paths of adulthood. Even as he crafted stories that dared to wrestle with life's biggest questions, stories that sought to unravel the mystery of why we exist, Tolstoy himself was locked in a silent struggle. His relationship with faith was not peaceful or comforting. It was complicated, layered, and most tortured. It teetered between admiration and alienation. He looked at those who believed with sincere envy, people who clung to religion with a quiet strength, who seemed to draw peace from it. He wanted that. Oh, how he wanted that. But somehow, it felt like it belonged to a world he couldn't enter. Like a warm home, he could only see through the window, but never step inside. In place of this unreachable faith, he tried to fill the emptiness with everything the world had to offer: success, pleasure, brilliant conversations, sensual distractions, and lofty ideas. And on the outside, it looked like he had it all. He lived the kind of life many people only fantasize about, in moments of longing. As a young man, he went off to war and came back a decorated soldier, brave, admired, almost mythical. He married Sophia, a woman of remarkable intelligence and unwavering devotion. She wasn't just his wife, she was his editor, his confidant, the anchor to his brilliance. Together, they raised 13 children. He bought land, managed a thriving estate, and gained fame that most writers could only dream of. And above all, he wrote, dear God, he wrote like a man on fire. With every word, he chased meaning, and for a while, it worked. Writing gave him a reason to get up in the morning. It gave him a sense of direction. It gave his soul something to cling to. But then, just like that, the meaning began to slip through his fingers. By the time he reached 50, everything changed. What once felt vibrant began to feel hollow. The very things that used to light him up, his family, his marriage, his wealth, even his words, started to feel like dust. Like shadows of something that used to matter. Parties felt empty. Conversations felt scripted. His possessions became burdens, not blessings. The applause that once fed him now echoed in his ears like a haunting. The same fame that had made him feel alive now felt like a suffocating mask. And, worst of all, he realized that the life he had built, grand, admired, prosperous, was built on sand. It could all disappear in a blink, and if it could vanish, was it ever real? Then came the terrifying questions, the kind that keep a man awake at night and trembling in the day. If not now, then when? If not tomorrow, then in 30 years, what's the difference? These weren't just idle thoughts. They were razor-sharp realizations, the kind that tears the soul open. Tolstoy understood that everything he had accomplished, everything he had loved, everything he had dreamed was temporary. Everything was destined to end. And if it was all going to end, what was the point of any of it? He poured this agony into one of his most intimate writings, a confession, and reading it is like watching a man's soul bleed onto the page. He didn't hold back. He admitted bravely, painfully, that he had seriously considered suicide. It seemed like the only logical escape from the unbearable weight of meaninglessness. He even confessed that he removed firearms and ropes from his home, not out of safety, but because he didn't trust himself not to use them during a moment of despair. That admission, to me, is one of the most gut-wrenching things a person can reveal. The fear, the raw vulnerability it speaks to a suffering so deep, so human, that it breaks your heart just to read it. Today, we call what he went through an existential crisis. But labels don't do it justice. It wasn't just a phase, it was a soul earthquake, a confrontation with the terrifying silence of the universe. A moment when the human heart screams, "Why am I here?" and hears nothing but the echo of its voice. For Tolstoy, this silence was deafening. He couldn't make peace with it. He couldn't accept that all would end without reason, without resolution. It made everything feel not just sad, but irrelevant. And yet this is where it gets truly powerful. He didn't give up, despite the darkness that threatened to consume him. Something deep within Tolstoy refused to let go. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was sheer defiance. Or maybe it was what he called the honey drops, tiny, almost imperceptible moments of joy that made life bearable. Even beautiful, moments that don't shout, but whisper. A child's giggle, a bird's song, a sunrise, a hand held in silence. Fleeting as they were, they pulled him back from the edge. They reminded him that life, even in its pain, still had sweetness. He illustrated this with one of the most unforgettable metaphors in a confession. A man, running from a beast, hangs from a branch above a well. Below him, a dragon waits. Death above, death below. And while clinging to that fragile branch, he notices drops of honey and stretches his tongue to taste them. He knows he's in danger, but in that one moment, he chooses to taste joy anyway. That image, it hits me every time. Because isn't that all of us, in one way or another, dangling between fear and fate, between what hunts us and what awaits us, but still trying to taste the sweetness of the moment? Still trying to find meaning in the middle of the madness? Those little drops of honey saved Tolstoy. They reminded him that life's meaning might not be found in wealth or fame or endless achievement, but in the soft, sacred moments that make the heart stir. A laugh, a song, a shared glance. These didn't erase his questions, but they gave him a reason to keep asking. That crisis, harsh, soul-wrecking, and brutally honest, was not the end of his journey. It was the beginning of something far deeper, something sacred. The man who gave the world stories that would live forever was now stepping into the most intense, most vulnerable, most transformative season of his life. And thank God he did, because it's from that very place of doubt and pain that his truest wisdom would one day rise. He would go on to search for answers in the most unexpected corners of life: philosophy, the peasant's wisdom, nature, even silence itself, yet the questions never stopped whispering in the background. He endured relentless inner battles, nights filled with invisible wars that few could understand. But what did he discover amid that tireless search? Did he uncover a way to heal the aching void? Or was the ache itself simply part of the human condition, one of those burdens we all learn to carry quietly? Stay with me, because the truth that Tolstoy found might not be what you'd expect. Let's trace the origin of the chaos. Ask yourself this: what if even the most joyful moments of your life, the ones that should make your heart overflow, couldn't quiet the emptiness that lurks just beneath the surface? That was the haunting reality Tolstoy faced. He knew, in a way that most never dare admit, what it felt like to live suspended between two extremes: the glorious mountaintop of worldly success and the suffocating valley of inner despair. But to truly understand the breaking point he reached at 50, we have to go back to the fragile foundations of his early life, back to the moments that left invisible marks on his soul. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment number 1 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. And here's where Tolstoy's story becomes something more than a tale of a great writer. It becomes something heartbreakingly human. Behind every genius, behind every legend we read about in books or admire from afar, is a person quietly carrying old wounds that never healed properly. Maybe you've felt it too, that strange, aching emptiness that sneaks up on you when everything seems fine. Tolstoy felt it deeply. It lived in him, and what makes his story so timeless is that even now, his words have the power to reach inside us and make us face our hidden pain. Born in 1828 into the grandeur of Russian nobility, Tolstoy seemed to be one of the lucky ones. His childhood unfolded on a sprawling estate, filled with servants, shimmering chandeliers, fine music, and everything money could provide. On the outside, his life looked like a dream. But inside that dream was a nightmare, one that would quietly shape his entire future. Because luxury, as it turns out, is a poor shield against grief. He lost his mother before he could even form memories of her. He was only 2 years old, and by the time he was 9, death took his father too. Just try to imagine that. Imagine being a child, small and vulnerable, suddenly thrust into a world where the people who were supposed to love and protect you simply vanish. It wasn't just sorrow he carried. It was a disorienting, soul-deep confusion. Those deaths weren't events. They were fractures, earthquakes that split the ground beneath his feet. And the aftershocks followed him for the rest of his life. Have you ever wondered how childhood loss lingers? How does it echo in the way we love, trust, and even breathe? For Tolstoy, those early absences created a silence that no noise could fill, a kind of quiet loneliness that made the world feel unreliable. His family estate, once buzzing with warmth and laughter, became a solemn space, more like a museum of what once was. He grew up haunted by the idea that nothing, absolutely nothing, was permanent. Not love, not family, not life itself. Raised by relatives and tutors who couldn't give him the nurturing he so desperately needed, young Tolstoy wandered emotionally, always searching, always wondering. He once wrote that no one ever truly explained life or death to him. That confession hurts. Imagine growing up with questions so heavy, yet having no one to help carry them. When he looked at religion, the answers felt cold and mechanical. The church he saw was bound by rules, trapped in rituals. He didn't see God in it, just man-made structures pretending to hold truth. It wasn't redemption that reached him. It was confusion, and often, quiet resentment. So in his youth, he did what so many of us do. When life leaves us with questions too big to bear, he ran. Not physically, but emotionally. He chased distractions. He pursued knowledge, hoping that education might provide what love and faith did not. But even academia let him down. The school system felt rigid, disconnected, and soulless. So he turned to the world's temptations, the very same ones that call to us when we're trying to silence the ache inside. Tolstoy lived recklessly. He gambled away money like it was meaningless. He attended parties filled with noise and wine and laughter, trying to lose himself in the chaos. He sought out brief romances, chasing love in all the wrong places, never quite finding what his heart longed for. He was brilliant, no doubt about it, but he was also deeply, desperately lost. And if I'm being honest, I think many of us have been there, maybe not with the same grandeur, but in spirit. When you feel empty, you'll try anything to feel full again. His contemporaries called him a genius, but they also knew he was wandering, a mind ablaze with ideas, yet a heart tangled in sorrow. It's a familiar paradox, isn't it? The people who seem the most impressive from the outside are often the ones fighting the fiercest inner battles, and Tolstoy was no exception. So, where did it all lead? What was the cost of this early pain and youthful escapism? It led him straight into the collapse, the unraveling that would shake him at 50. But that unraveling, painful as it was, wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of his awakening. And as we continue with Tolstoy's journey, you'll see how those scars, yes, even the ones left in childhood, can eventually point us toward truth, toward something deeper than fleeting pleasures, something more eternal than fame, something that might even save us from ourselves. He traveled far and wide, fought in real battles, and collected stories that would make other men feel alive, but still, no matter where he went or what he achieved, that same emptiness followed him like a shadow that refused to let go. You could say that Tolstoy's life was filled with drama, adventure, and intensity, everything that most of us think would give life meaning. But for him, those years were hollow. He would later describe them as a blur of experiences without direction, a life where pleasure was the only pursuit, and even that felt painfully temporary. There was no compass, no anchor, no deeper purpose guiding him forward. Just motion, just noise, just moments that passed too quickly to matter. And then, as the silence between the thrills grew louder, he began to question everything. If even the most enjoyable, thrilling, or romantic moments fade into the background like fog, what remains? What gives any of it substance, permanence, or value? That answer, oh, how he longed for it, didn't come right away. It didn't come with the travels, or the victories, or the pleasures. It didn't even come with love. But when Tolstoy started writing, something began to shift. For the first time, it seemed like he'd stumbled onto a path, a calling, maybe even a way out of the emptiness. And the world certainly noticed. He didn't just become a writer, he became a force, a literary giant, one of the greatest storytellers of his time. But here's the heartbreaking twist. His books weren't just fictional masterpieces. They were deeply personal excavations. His writing, as breathtaking as it was, wasn't a cure. It was a mirror. His novels weren't just about characters, they were about him. He poured his soul into them, threading his inner anguish between the lines of every ethical dilemma, every existential crisis, every shattered illusion. He dissected human nature, morality, suffering, and love, not as a philosopher looking from the outside, but as a man who was bleeding on the inside. It was raw. It was honest. It was brilliant. And yet, it wasn't enough. Even while penning War and Peace and Anna Karenina, two of the most celebrated works in all of literature, Tolstoy confessed in his private journals that he felt like he was sinking into a black hole. Can you imagine that? Creating timeless art, inspiring millions, becoming a legend in your lifetime, and still feeling broken, incomplete, hollow. Every success he achieved became another illusion that eventually faded. Another mountain climbed, only to find a deeper valley on the other side. It's a painful, but all too relatable truth. How many of us have longed for something, worked hard for it, reached it, only to realize it didn't heal what was hurting inside. Tolstoy lived that on a massive, soul-crushing scale. On the outside, he had it all: fame, wealth, influence, a family that many would envy. He was married to Sofia Andreevna, a woman of remarkable strength, intelligence, and fierce loyalty. Together, they built what seemed like a model life: 13 children, a majestic estate, endless resources. They were wrapped in luxury and admired by society. But, as is often the case, what sparkled on the surface did not reflect the truth underneath. Because behind the grand portraits and the intellectual conversations, behind the family dinners and literary applause, Tolstoy was quietly unraveling. He once described wealth as a golden prison, beautiful to look at, but suffocating to live inside. And the more he acquired, the more he felt trapped. Each new comfort only made the hollowness more obvious. He wasn't ungrateful, he was awake. He saw what so many others didn't, that material comfort, while pleasant, could never answer the deeper cries of the soul. And here's what stings: while people around him seemed content chasing money, titles, prestige, and distractions, Tolstoy saw right through it all. To him, it felt like society was dancing on a ship that was slowly sinking. They were decorating the decks, laughing over wine, blind to the water rising beneath their feet. He couldn't do it. He couldn't pretend. He couldn't lie to himself anymore. And that truth, that unbearable truth, began to choke him from the inside. Because even with a home full of laughter, even with children running through the gardens and readers praising his every word, he still couldn't shake the terrifying realization everything was temporary, everything would end. And when it did, what would it all mean? The thoughts became louder, darker, more persistent. Mortality, the one truth none of us can escape, loomed larger in his mind. The meaning of life didn't just feel distant, it felt unreachable. And instead of bringing peace, his reflections brought suffocation. Each breath became heavier. Each day is more disorienting. And while the world adored the great Leo Tolstoy, he was quietly drowning in questions no one could answer. And maybe you felt a sliver of that too. That moment when, even in joy, something feels off. When your soul whispers, there must be more than this. And that whisper, that's what Tolstoy lived with every single day. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment number 2 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. But his journey wasn't over. Not yet. This collapse would push him towards something extraordinary, something spiritual, something that would turn his story from one of despair to one of awakening. And we're just getting to the most powerful part. He watched people around him smiling, dancing, laughing, raising glasses under candlelight, speaking of love and ambition, as if it all made perfect sense. But to him, it felt like a stage play, a well-rehearsed performance, where everyone pretended to understand the script. Behind their eyes, he suspected they too felt the same unspoken fear. What if none of this truly matters? Are we all just pretending it makes sense? Tolstoy asked himself. And that haunting question wasn't just his. It's one many of us carry in the quiet corners of our hearts. That's what makes Tolstoy so profoundly fascinating. Not just his brilliance, but his relatability. His story, in many ways, is ours. He achieved what countless people spend their whole lives chasing: respect, romantic love, a beautiful home, financial security, and a legacy. He had the applause of the world and the warmth of a family, but instead of peace, he found an aching emptiness that refused to be silenced. And let's be honest, how often do we tell ourselves, if I just had that job, that partner, that house, that number in my bank account, then I'd feel complete? We chase these dreams as if they're the answer to our soul's longing. But what if the painful truth is that it's never really enough? What if those dreams are merely distractions from the deeper hunger inside us? Tolstoy forces us to face that terrifying possibility. He holds up a mirror and whispers, "What fills the void?" Because he tried. Lord, did he try? He reached for pleasure, for wealth, for knowledge, for prestige. He wrapped himself in the finest fabrics life had to offer, and still felt naked in the cold wind of meaninglessness. But here's what I admire most. He didn't give up. He didn't curl into despair and vanish. No, he decided to fight. He turned inward and began a brave journey, not outward toward more applause, but inward toward truth. That journey led him down an unpredictable road, one that many are too afraid to travel. He began to confront the biggest, most terrifying questions. What is life? Why do we suffer? What is the point of love, death, creation, and morality? He ventured into the depths of philosophy, tore through spiritual texts, and wrestled with ideas that left his mind exhausted and his soul raw. And somewhere in that storm, he started to see, however faintly, a different kind of light. You see, Tolstoy's life isn't just an interesting biography. It's a living invitation. An invitation to confront the questions we bury under our busy schedules and endless distractions. An invitation to stop running, to stop pretending, and to sit in the silence and ask, what does it all mean? And if you're brave enough to walk with him through the darkness, you might just come out seeing the world and yourself through entirely new eyes. So if this resonates with you, I urge you, don't miss what's coming next. Click the bell and stay close, because the answers Tolstoy found could very well change the way you live. Not because they offer an easy fix, but because they speak directly to the soul. And now we ask a deeper question. What would you do if your mind, your greatest strength, became your worst enemy? That was Tolstoy's cross to bear. The same brilliant, analytical mind that created unforgettable characters, intricate narratives, and philosophical masterpieces also led him into an abyss of doubt. His genius didn't shield him from the crisis, it delivered him to it. When the existential storm hit, it hit hard. But he didn't shrink. He leaned into the chaos. Driven by a dangerous cocktail of despair and curiosity, he embarked on a journey that would shake everything he once believed was true. And here's the irony. Tolstoy, perhaps the greatest intellect of his era, looked for answers in the most complex places, thick volumes of philosophy, intricate theological debates, deep discussions about logic and ethics. But while he wandered through the forest of intellect, he began to notice something strange. The simplest people around him, peasants, servants, farmers, seemed to walk with a quiet, unshakable peace. They weren't quoting Kant or Pascal. They weren't debating the nature of consciousness. They simply believed. Their lives were rooted in something humble, something pure, something that could not be explained, but was deeply felt. And this, for Tolstoy, was maddening, because it left him with a dilemma that tore at the very core of who he was. Could he accept that the answers he so desperately sought might not be found in reason or books, but in faith? Could he, a man of logic and intellect, surrender to something he could not dissect, measure, or prove? It was a war between head and heart. Reason told him to keep searching, to keep doubting, to keep questioning. But his soul, tired and aching, longed for rest, for something certain, for something real. And that's where Tolstoy stood on the edge of a terrifying truth. What if reason can't answer everything? What if the mind that had guided him so far was now the very thing standing in his way? And that's the quiet brilliance of Tolstoy's journey. It was never about arriving at the perfect answer. It was about having the courage to admit he didn't have it. It was about realizing that the search itself was the transformation. And maybe, just maybe, the key to peace isn't found in knowing everything, but in learning how to live with mystery and in choosing faith over fear. So stay with us, because Tolstoy's story isn't over. And if you, like him, have ever stood in that silent space between doubt and belief, you might just find a piece of your truth in what comes next. He stood on the edge of a decision, one that would shake the very core of who he was, a decision that would not only shift his perspective, but redefine how he would live out his final years on this earth. It wasn't just a change in philosophy, it was a transformation of the soul. But how did he get there? And what did this radical inner shift mean for his work, his relationships, and the legacy he would leave behind? Leo Tolstoy, the man who once searched for meaning in the polished pages of philosophy, in the rigid structure of science, in the fleeting ecstasies of pleasure, unexpectedly found his first glimpse of peace, not in intellect, but in the dirt-covered hands and sun-weathered faces of peasants. Yes, in the very people's society, 10 are overlooked or dismissed. The men and women who toiled from dawn until dusk, with little to their names, and yet they carried something he didn't, a quiet strength, a stillness, a kind of sacred peace that glowed from within. This moment of discovery became the turning point of Tolstoy's long and agonizing search. It was as though he had spent years combing through a locked library for truth, only to find it resting gently in the open fields between the calloused fingers of farmers, in their simple prayers, their soft lullabies, their deep belly laughs at the end of a hard day. These people, who suffered so much loss, hunger, sickness, death, still found reasons to smile, to celebrate, to believe. Why? How was that possible? This revelation didn't just move Tolstoy. It unraveled him. Because of all his knowledge, all his status, all his legendary literary genius, he realized he had missed something essential. These peasants, with no formal education and no libraries to hide in, lived with a kind of clarity he could barely understand. While he had been chasing meaning through theories and institutions, they had quietly built their lives around faith, a faith not dictated by religious institutions, but born from experience, hardship, and hope. And it broke something open inside him. He began to watch them not as a nobleman watching his workers, but as a soul desperate to understand. In his most fragile moments, when fear of death and meaninglessness crushed him, he noticed the way these people lived, their rhythm, their simplicity. They worked without complaint, gave thanks without needing to understand why, and held close to their families and communities. Despite their suffering, they did not despair. They endured. More than that, they found joy. Laughter echoed through homes that barely had enough bread. Songs were sung in fields where crops sometimes failed. They prayed not out of fear, but from a place of love and surrender. And for Tolstoy, it was both humbling and maddening. How could they, those with so little, know something that he, with everything, could not grasp? How could they find peace in loss, hope in hardship, and purpose in pain? And more hauntingly, why couldn't he? Have you ever seen someone who seems content with very little, and it leaves you wondering why you feel so restless despite having so much? That was the spiritual torment Tolstoy faced, and it shook him. He realized that the peasants weren't merely surviving, they were living with purpose, with conviction, with a depth of heart he had never touched. They believed not in superstition, not because they were told to, but because they had seen enough of life to know that without faith, the world becomes unbearably cold. Their belief wasn't intellectual, it was embodied. It was how they lived, how they loved, how they endured. And that shook Tolstoy to his core. But this wasn't a fairy tale epiphany. He didn't drop to his knees and suddenly accepted it all. No, he struggled, viciously. His mind, trained in logic, shaped by years of analysis and reasoning, resisted the idea that faith could be the answer. How could he, a man who had questioned the authority of the church, who had seen firsthand the hypocrisy and rigidity within organized religion, now lean into belief? His memories of religion from childhood were tainted. He had witnessed a church that was more obsessed with rituals and control than with compassion or truth. He saw rules where he longed for connection, judgment where he needed mercy, and that wound never fully healed. So when faith re-entered the picture, it felt threatening. It challenged the very identity he had built his life on, and yet deep down he knew. He knew that the answers he had sought in fame, brilliance, in prestige, had all led him back to the same aching question: why are we here, and what is it all for? If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment on number 3 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. The peasants didn't answer it with essays or lectures. They answered it by living, by holding their children in their arms, loving their neighbors, waking up each morning, and trusting that life had meaning, even when it was hard. And for all of Tolstoy's doubts, for all his questions, he couldn't deny that there was something sacred in that. So he stood at a crossroads, except that maybe the truth wasn't something to be proven, but lived or stay trapped in the endless, exhausting maze of the mind. And that decision, tortured, slow, and deeply human, would lead him into the most radical chapter of his life. So stay close, because in the next part of this journey, we'll see what happened when one of history's greatest minds chose to surrender not to religion as an institution, but to faith as a way of being. And it may just change the way you see your own life. But what Tolstoy found in the peasants was not the cold, institutional religion he had long rejected. It wasn't the rigid doctrines, the grand cathedrals, or the guilt-laden sermons of his childhood. No, what he encountered in them was something altogether different. Something tender, something pure. It was faith, but not the kind carved in stone or imposed by fear. It was instinctive, lived and breathed, woven seamlessly into their everyday lives. And yet, even as this quiet truth began to stir something within him, Tolstoy hesitated. He described himself during this time as standing on a narrow bridge suspended between two vast worlds. On one side stood logic, reason, the mental fortress he had built his entire life within. It had been his identity, his weapon, his guide. On the other side stood faith, vague, vulnerable, intangible, but deeply human. And standing on that bridge, he faced the agonizing choice: hold tightly to the safety of what could be explained, or surrender to something he could not define, but felt deep in his bones. Crossing that bridge would mean letting go of a part of himself he had clung to for decades. It would mean questioning everything he thought made him strong. Have you ever felt that tension? That moment where your mind tells you one thing, but your heart is whispering something else entirely? That inner war, the conflict between head and heart, is something we've all faced in one form or another. And for Tolstoy, it was no different. It tore at him, challenged him, softened him. Eventually, he began to see what few dare to admit: that reason, as powerful and noble as it is, has its limits. Logic can explain the mechanics of the world, but it often fails to touch the soul. He famously wrote, "Reason tells me life is meaningless, but faith tells me there's a greater purpose. Which should I listen to?" That question, simple yet seismic, marked a turning point in his life. For the first time, he allowed the door of his heart to open just a crack to the possibility of something greater. Not something proven, but something deeply felt. And in that small crack, something extraordinary happened. Hope crept in. It was subtle at first. It didn't announce itself with trumpets or revelations. But little by little, Tolstoy noticed something he hadn't felt in years. As he let go of the need to dissect everything, he began to experience a quiet, almost childlike peace. And what surprised him most was where he found it, not in theories or books, but in the quiet, ordinary moments of life. The peasant's faith wasn't flashy. It didn't shout. It didn't debate. It didn't require a stage. It showed itself in how they lived, their patience, their kindness, their reverence for simple things. A mother soothing her child's tears without needing to ask why they came. A farmer planting seeds in dry earth, praying for rain, but still working the land as if it would come. A woman lighting a candle in the dark, hands folded in prayer, trusting that someone out there heard her even if no answer came. These weren't just actions. They were living testaments to a faith that required no proof, only love and courage. And to Tolstoy, it was nothing short of a revelation. Because maybe, just maybe, the meaning of life wasn't meant to be solved like a riddle. Maybe it was meant to be lived one quiet moment at a time. Maybe it wasn't about conquering death or outsmarting suffering, but about embracing the sacred within the ordinary. He began to ask a new kind of question, not what is the meaning of life, but what if the meaning is in how we choose to live each passing moment? One story that struck Tolstoy to his core came from a peasant whose entire year's harvest was wiped out in a violent storm. For a man like Tolstoy, who once feared that even the slightest loss could unravel everything, this would have been devastating. But the peasant didn't weep or curse the sky. Instead, he knelt in the mud, lifted his eyes to heaven, and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Stunned, Tolstoy asked him, "Why are you thanking God?" The man's answer was so simple, so profound, that it cut through Tolstoy's soul. The harvest is temporary, but the life God gives us is eternal. Those words shattered something in him. Or perhaps they healed something. Because in that single moment, he saw what he had been blind to for so long, that peace wasn't about controlling life, it was about surrendering to it. That man, standing in the ruins of his crop, radiated a strength Tolstoy had never known. Not the strength of intellect, but the strength of trust, of surrender, of knowing that even when the visible world falls apart, there is something deeper that holds you together. That encounter didn't erase Tolstoy's doubts. It didn't turn him into a dogmatic believer, but it changed him. It softened his view of faith. It opened his heart to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the things that matter most in life aren't things you can prove, but things you feel. Love, gratitude, connection, trust. So perhaps the real miracle wasn't that Tolstoy found all the answers. Perhaps the miracle was that he stopped needing them, and in doing so, he discovered something far greater. Stay with us, because the next part of this journey reveals how this awakening would ripple through his family, his work, and the world. The man who once stood on the bridge between reason and faith would finally choose a side, and that choice would not only define his final years, but offer a powerful lesson for all of us searching for peace in the noise of modern life. For Tolstoy, this was more than just a personal realization, it was a spiritual turning point that changed the trajectory of his life. He began to see, with a clarity that had eluded him for decades, that reason alone could never carry him across the vast sea of life's deepest mysteries. He had spent so many years believing that if he could just think deeply enough, read widely enough, or write brilliantly enough, he could reason his way out of the darkness. But the void he felt in his soul was not something logic could fill. By this stage in his journey, Tolstoy had already traveled far through war, fame, family, doubt, despair, and dazzling success. He began that journey thinking the intellect was supreme, that answers lived in the minds of the great thinkers and the pages of dusty books. But over time, he discovered something both humbling and liberating. The truths he was chasing were being quietly lived out in the simple, faithful lives of the very people he once looked down on, the peasants. That realization shook him. It unmade the man he thought he was. But now came the harder part. Was he truly ready to live this new truth? Or would his old habits, his sharp, skeptical, endlessly questioning mind drag him back from the edge just as he was about to step into something new? He stood at the edge of the river, the waters of faith gently flowing before him, asking, "Can I let go? Can I surrender to something I can't fully explain?" If Tolstoy's story has made you pause and reflect, just imagine what's still ahead. Because as profound as this revelation was, it was only the beginning of a far more challenging journey. It's one thing to recognize truth. It's another thing entirely to live it. And for Tolstoy, the hardest step wasn't discovering faith. It was embodying it, day after day, thought after thought, sacrifice after sacrifice. After a lifetime filled with relentless questions, philosophical torment, and desperate soul-searching, Tolstoy finally caught a spark of peace in the one thing he had spent years resisting, faith. But this wasn't a clean, straightforward path. It didn't come with lightning bolts or clear instructions. No, it was messy, winding, full of stops and starts, of doubt and surrender. It required him to completely re-examine everything he had once believed about life, about death, about the meaning of it all. Tolstoy didn't just shift his mindset, he restructured his entire way of living. And what came next was nothing short of a radical transformation, one that would ripple through his family, his community, and his legacy for generations to come. Because faith, he realized, could not be lived in theory. It had to be felt in the fingertips, in the mud of the fields, in the tears shed during prayer, in the quiet choices made when no one is watching. He began to apply the simple, sacred principles he had observed in the peasants: gratitude for what you have, humility in who you are, and service to others without expecting reward. This didn't mean blindly submitting to the institutionalized religion he had always distrusted. No! For Tolstoy, faith had to be real, raw, and personal. It had to rise from the inside out. He didn't accept the traditions and formalities of the church that had once repelled him. Instead, he created his spiritual path, one grounded in love, simplicity, compassion, and action. He began shedding the layers of his former life, the luxury, the titles, the aristocratic status. Tolstoy, who once dined with nobles and walked through lavish estates, began giving away his wealth to the poor. He pulled himself away from the glittering social circles of Russian high society and threw himself into the soil. Literally, he took up simple tasks, planting vegetables, harvesting crops, and walking barefoot in the fields. He traded the pen for the plow, at least for a while. Not because he was romanticizing poverty, but because he wanted to live like the people who had shown him the way back to his soul. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons helpful, please comment on number 4 below to let me know that you are still watching this video with me. But was he finally at peace? Not entirely, because even the noblest transformations carry a price. The more his inner life aligned with this new vision, the more his outer world began to shake. His family, especially his wife Sophia, who had been by his side through decades of writing, childbirth, and social pressure, struggled to understand this sudden shift. She didn't see Tolstoy's transformation as a spiritual awakening. To her, it looked like madness. He wanted to give away their wealth, the estate, and the rights to his books. She worried for their children's future, their security, their inheritance. What would become of them if he gave everything away? This disagreement wasn't small. It cut to the very heart of their relationship. They had once been so close, so united, but now they lived in constant conflict. Their home, once filled with love and creative energy, became a battleground between two vastly different visions of what life should be. And maybe that surprises you, how a man, even after finding what he had so desperately sought, still faced pain, misunderstanding, and loss. But that's the reality of transformation. It often comes at a cost. Still, Tolstoy didn't turn back. He couldn't. He had seen the truth, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. He knew that living with integrity meant walking forward, even when the ground shook beneath him. And this shift in his soul began to pour into his writing. He stepped away from grand novels about aristocrats and battles and started focusing on something else entirely human: conscience. He began writing essays, moral reflections, and spiritual texts that wrestled with poverty, violence, injustice, and above all, the eternal question of how we should live. He tackled the ethics of wealth, the futility of war, and the power of love. In doing so, he planted seeds of thought that still bloom today in the hearts of those searching for something real. Tolstoy's transformation wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean, but it was true. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for, that when our time comes to stand on the bridge between who we were and who we're meant to be, we'll have the courage to cross it, no matter the cost. So stay with us, because the final chapter of Tolstoy's life holds the most profound lesson of all: what it means to truly live with nothing but love, humility, and faith. As Tolstoy's spiritual awakening deepened, his questions began to stretch beyond personal meaning and into the world around him. He no longer wondered only about life's purpose, but about the systems that shaped it, the institutions, the hierarchies, the injustices that kept people trapped in suffering. He began to challenge the very power structures he had once been a part of. Nobility, government, church, wealth. He looked at them all with fresh, questioning eyes. What he saw disturbed him. He saw inequality not as an unfortunate reality, but as a moral failure. For Tolstoy, the pursuit of truth could no longer be separated from the pursuit of justice. He came to believe that true inner peace could only exist when a person devoted their life to the well-being of others, not in abstract ideas or distant donations, but in daily sacrificial acts of compassion and solidarity. His convictions led him to advocate for social justice in radical ways. He promoted education for the poor, criticized the privileges of the elite, and embraced pacifism with unwavering clarity. He even wrote fierce critiques of the military, declaring that violence could never be justified, even in the name of law or empire. These beliefs would echo far beyond Russia. Across the world, a young lawyer in South Africa named Mohandas Gandhi read Tolstoy's work and felt something awakened within him. Tolstoy's writings, especially on non-violent resistance and the moral force of love, would become a cornerstone of Gandhi's movement, a movement that would shake the foundations of colonialism. To think, an aging Russian writer buried under years of inner torment, unknowingly planting seeds of revolution in a foreign land. That's the beauty of truth. It never stays where it's sown. It grows in unexpected places. But did these radical shifts solve all of Tolstoy's struggles? The answer is as human as it is paradoxical. He did find peace, yes, but not the kind that silences all doubt. His heart still questioned. His soul still stirred. But now, he had made peace with the fact that maybe some questions aren't meant to be answered. And in that acceptance, he found something even more precious than certainty: freedom. He began to realize that life, in all its complexity, might never be fully understood, and that maybe it didn't have to be. Maybe the meaning of life wasn't some hidden treasure waiting at the end of a perfect path. Maybe it was something woven into the way we walk the path, the questions we ask, the love we give, the truth we refuse to abandon, even when it costs us everything. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson Tolstoy left behind. That meaning isn't found in definitive answers, but in how we ask the questions, with courage, with humility, with an open heart. When we look at Tolstoy's journey, it's hard not to see pieces of ourselves reflected. Who hasn't felt uncertain, even when life looks perfect on the outside? Who hasn't laid awake at night wondering, am I truly living, or am I just surviving? Who hasn't smiled in a crowd, but felt a quiet ache inside? Tolstoy's story reminds us that we're not alone in that ache, that it's okay to question, to wrestle, to not have it all figured out. He shows us that we don't need to wait for a grand revelation to start living meaningfully. That small acts of love, a kind word, a patient moment, a helping hand can hold just as much power as the greatest ideas. Are you waiting for lightning to strike? Or could you begin right now, in the small, reachable steps already before you? In the final chapter of his life, Tolstoy tried to separate himself even more from the world of wealth and convention. He longed to embody the simplicity he had come to admire so deeply. But this desire, this pull towards spiritual authenticity, brought fresh turmoil to his personal life. His wife, Sophia, once his closest partner, now struggled to understand the man he had become. She feared his generosity, his willingness to give away their fortune, would leave their children destitute. The house that had once been filled with creative joy became filled with tension. They argued. They wept. They misunderstood one another. And isn't that often the truth of transformation? That it can divide as much as it unites? That when one person's soul evolves, it can create earthquakes in the lives of those who have not yet shifted with them. At the age of 82, Tolstoy, worn down by emotional exhaustion and desperate for peace, did something both heartbreaking and heroic. He left. He walked away from everything, from the comforts of his estate, from the conflicts with his family, from the man he had once been. Alone, he boarded a train in search of solitude, perhaps hoping to find, in his final moments, the silence his soul still craved. He didn't get far. He fell ill during his journey and passed away in a small, cold train station, surrounded not by fanfare, but by a few devoted friends and admirers. It may sound like a tragic ending, an old man dying far from the comforts of home, but in many ways, it was fitting, because Tolstoy's life had never been about comfort. It had been about truth. And in those final days, he lived it raw, stripped of pretense, and wholly real. He left behind not just books, but a message, a way of living, a whisper from history that still speaks to our modern hearts. No matter how lost you feel, you can start again. You don't need perfect clarity to move forward. You don't need to have all the answers to live with purpose. You just need the willingness to ask, the humility to listen, and the courage to walk towards something greater. Tolstoy's legacy is not found in mansions or monuments. It's found in his words, in his questions, in his willingness to change, to risk everything for something more meaningful. And today, more than a century after his final breath, his story continues to inspire anyone brave enough to question, to grow, and to believe that love, humility, and faith, however imperfectly we hold them, can still lead us home. So, after walking through the incredible journey of Leo Tolstoy's transformation from doubt to discovery, from despair to a quiet kind of peace, what have you learned? Tolstoy's life teaches us that the search for meaning is never easy, never linear, and never truly finished. But within the questions, the struggles, and even the pain, there is a path made of humility, love, faith, and the courage to change no matter your age or how far you've gone in the wrong direction. Now, we want to hear from you. What's one thing from Tolstoy's story that touched you the most? What's one lesson you're going to carry into your own life starting today? Maybe it's learning to embrace simplicity. Maybe it's choosing love over fear. Or maybe, like Tolstoy, it's finally giving yourself permission to ask the hard questions and not run from them. Comment below and share one thing you've learned and how you plan to practice it in your life. If this video has inspired you, please take a moment to leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories that move your heart and awaken your soul. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and never stop searching for the deeper meaning within your life.